We are especially honored. This next presentation is about D-Day, the 75th anniversary. What a day. June the 6th, 1944. I once had the opportunity to speak with when I was stationed in Germany, I spoke with a guy that actually admitted that he was in the German army fought on the Western Front. Most of the people I met in Germany in 1963, 64, they all fought on the Eastern Front. Nobody fought the Americans. Nobody wanted to acknowledge that. But I met a guy that acknowledged that. And he said, you know, at the time I was a staff sergeant, I think, or airman first or something. And he said, you know, there's no reason for you guys to have been successful that day. He said, you're a bunch of country boys, been bouncing around out in the water for hours. Most of you were sick. You were waterlogged. You had too much weight on your back. You really weren't all that well trained. We had the high ground. We had plenty of time to prepare. We had better weapons, more ammunition, shorter supply lines, and better discipline. You know why you were successful? Because the average American fighting man said, this ain't working. Let's go do that. The rest of the world sits and waits for orders. It is the ingenuity, the freedom to make a decision of the average American fighting man. It's part of our DNA. That's what you're learning, and that's what we're depending on you. 75th anniversary of D-Day. For those of you that have been to Normandy, there's something that you just feel when you get off the bus or get out of the car. There's something you just feel as you walk along the beach. Or if you do go to Normandy, I encourage you to go to Omaha Beach, go down to the water, look out at the water, and then walk out in the water. Stop when you're waist high. I've done this. Turn around and look and see what they saw. And try to imagine. What kind of people are these? They are us. They have set the bar high, and we are so grateful. It is my pleasure to introduce Kara Phillips of ABC News and John Roberts, White House correspondent for Fox News, to moderate our panel on D-Day, the 75th anniversary. And that was a key that they...
Oh, that was the cue.
Yeah. Nothing happened.
Are they on?
It says on. There we go. Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for being here. It's a real pleasure to be here. To my left is George Ciampa, who was a veteran of Utah Beach. In comes Louis Graziano. He landed in the third wave at Omaha. Ray Lambert, who is an Army medic who's got an amazing story to tell. Marcella Ryan LeBeau is coming in. She just turned 100 years old, if you can believe that. And coming up behind Marcella is Tom Rice. He was a paratrooper with the 101st Airborne who recently jumped back in to France just to relive the experience. So these are our war heroes from the D-Day invasion 75 years ago. I was fortunate enough to be in Normandy this past June as they commemorated the 75th anniversary. And I know that George was there. Was anybody else there in Normandy for 75? Yep. Ray was there as well. And it was just an amazing, amazing ceremony. And when you think about what happened there 75 years ago, it's just almost incomprehensible. So we're going to sit down with these wonderful American heroes and hear their stories, and we'll get a chance to ask them some questions as well.
Good. I think, is this on? Do I have this on as well,
Yes.
guys? It's okay? All right, great.
Have a seat, everybody.
Yeah, please, let's all sit down.
Thank goodness.
You all right there, Marcella? Can you believe that? 100 years old. Is that just amazing?
That's stunning.
I love looking into the audience and realizing that there's so many of you here, practically all of you from all the various academies, and being embedded in Iraq 4 times for a number of months and witnessing what the young men and women have done for our country, and then to be here with the greatest generation. I mean, this is what your life is going to be. These are the stories you're going to tell. I mean, they have been the trailblazers for all of you. So it's so wonderful to have the younger generation and those that have experienced what you have yet to embark upon. So thank you so much for being here and just joining us in this conversation. And what we hope so much is that you will have questions for our panel. We're going to let them each tell a special story, a special memory, and then we have mics on each side of the room. So please be prepared to ask questions, because I think that it would be so valuable for all of you. So thank you so much for being here.
You know, as I said, I was in Normandy this past June for the commemoration of the 75th, and George was there, and Ray as well. And when you look down over the cliffs, down toward Omaha Beach, which is where the American cemetery sits atop, and it's so placid and serene, and the waves are just sort of calmly lapping up against the beach, you can't imagine what went on there 75 years ago. George, why don't you start us off? You landed at Utah Beach, which is just down the coast a little bit. What are your memories of that day?
Well, I was an 18-year-old skinny kid, about 112 pounds, couldn't swim, not that that would help you very much. And what do I remember? I remember being on a ship anchored offshore, a ship that we came to Normandy on from England. And we had to wait on that ship. It seemed like hours, but it wasn't. But there was a lot of shelling going on from the German 88 emplacements, hitting ships out there. I saw a tanker get hit and blow up right near us, bodies in the water, debris in the water. We had to wait our turn to go down a rope ladder. Finally, did get on a rope ladder and got into a LCI landing craft. And we started into the beach, and he turned around. I thought, because we could hear the 88s screaming over us. We called them screaming Mimis. And they really screamed loud. And they were hitting ships. There were like 4,000 ships, they say, out there. And they were hitting ships, so there was a lot of bodies in the water and debris. And we started in and turned around, went back out, and came in a second time. Third time we came in, for years I figured it was because whoever was driving that LCI thought we were going to get hit, because we could hear the screaming Mimis over us. Mm-hmm. And so what I found out, though, years later, is that he was looking for a place to land, because the Germans had obstacles in the water, so we couldn't go all the way in. So when we got there, had to wade in the water. And so, of course, you know, you remember a lot of things and you forget a lot of things. Talking to the other guys, the same experience as I had.
It must have been all a blur.
Yeah, it was. You couldn't believe it was happening. Of course, I was scared to death. And so our job, though, was in the 607th Graves Registration Company. I tried to get in the Air Corps, and I passed the test after they had lowered the eye requirements to 20/30 for pilots, no glasses. But my company commander wouldn't let me go. This is in Cheyenne, Wyoming, after I got drafted. I tried to get in the Air Corps before, and my eyes were 20/22, and I couldn't make it. So when they lowered the eye requirements, I said, oh, yeah, you know, I'm in. So I got in, and they notified my company commander, and he got pretty irate with me. And there was a group going overseas right away, and they needed one person. So I was a replacement, and all the guys were older than I was, because at 18 I was the youngest of the whole bunch. In fact, there's only one living person now who was a year older than I was. The rest of the guys are gone. But our job was to gather the dead. We worked a lot with the medics, as Ray can tell you, and they tended to the wounded and we tended to the dead. So we buried guys in mattress covers. We didn't have to do any of the digging. We did everything else except the digging. we had German prisoners like a couple of days after the invasion. And we had German prisoners the rest of the way. For 11 months every day, we initiated 17 temporary cemeteries throughout France, Belgium, and Germany. We handled about 75,000 dead bodies. That's American and German. The German didn't pick up their dead. We did. We buried them in a separate cemetery. So it was a tough job. And I did break down one day after a couple of weeks of doing that. And our lieutenant pulled out his .45 and he said, "You get your ass out there and suck it up." And so that's the way they talked to you in World War II. I mean, what do they call this thing now? NTSD, is it? Something like that? What do they call that?
PTS? Are you talking about post-traumatic syndrome?
Fatigue. They have a different name.
PTS.
PTSD.
Post-traumatic syndrome.
Yeah. So yeah, I didn't get. After the war, after 11 months of doing this throughout France, Belgium, Germany, I had to stay another 7 months in the Army of Occupation. We had to wait to see what was happening in Japan. That was helpful to me. At the time, I didn't like it, but it was helpful because I got a chance to really chill out for 7 months. If I went right home right away, I'd have been basket case probably, but I did get a chance to chill out, and I met a German girl in a flying trapeze.
Oh, there's a story right there.
There's the story we want to hear.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was a bad guy because I had a Jeep illegally for 7 months, and damn near got court-martialed. But I let it all hang out after doing what I was doing. The way I didn't get court-martialed, I had a good lieutenant that said, "George, I know what you did for 11 months, and your age," I was 19 then. He said, "I'm going to look the other way." But he said, "You had stolen equipment." I said, "Sir, I didn't steal it. I just borrowed it." That didn't go over too well. But anyway, that's pretty much the story of what I did in the war. It was not pleasant. Nobody else wanted to do that job. I didn't want to do that job. But somebody had to do it. And that's the way it was. Thank you.
And we'll come back to the story about the German girl a little later on.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, obviously George has kept his sense of humor because as everybody was coming out, George said, "Aren't there some roller skates I can kind of zip into my seat?" To which Lewis said to him, "Is that moonshine in your water bottle there?" The moonshine will be after the discussion, guys, okay? All right.
My wife doesn't believe it was a platonic relationship.
Like we said, we'll get back to the trapeze act after everybody tells their story. Hence, the roller skates, I guess, fits in there somewhere. Ray, George, talked about this solemn duty of having to bury the dead. You were the one, though, in the first wave of Omaha. You were the medic, injured yourself, still fighting to save lives. My favorite story about you is Ray's Rock and how you were just, pulling the guys behind everything and anything to protect them and save their lives. Will you please talk about that and you were so mission focused even despite your injuries and how you created Ray's Rock?
When we were going in, I was on the LCCs, the landing craft, the Higgins boats as they're known. I could see ahead of us that we had nothing but open space between the water, and the Germans had cut all the foliage down, had moved buildings from near the beach so that they'd have an open sight right on us on the beach. So as we got in closer to the beach, I could see a machine gun just a little east of Omaha Beach, and then one to the west of Omaha Beach. It was firing down off the hill. As we got close enough in, the bullets began to hit the ramp on the front. It sounded just like hail hitting. And I knew that from my experiences in Africa, the landing in Africa, and also I made the invasion of Sicily, that we were going to have a tough time getting through those machine guns. And I talked to my guys that was on the boat, told them to go, as we got in, as the ramp go down, to go as far underwater as possible. I also knew, or we did, that there was barbed wire, that the Germans had barbed wire underwater, and mines tied to the barbed wire, and also they had hazards there that they'd put in, some called French gates, the others to keep the boats from getting in. So those also had mines on them. And as we got in closer, and the boat pulled in about 4 feet of water and let the ramp down. I started off the ramp. I was standing in the left corner of the Higgins boat, and I told my guys, I said, let's go, keep your mind on your job. And if keeping their mind on what they were doing and what they're trained to do takes a little away from the fear, if there's any, of seeing the machine guns there, because you're totally thinking of what you're supposed to be doing. So they were well trained. I was very proud of them, and still I'm very proud of them. And as I went off the boat, something went through my right elbow, and that I'm not sure, it wasn't a bullet, it was shrapnel, I would say, or fragmentation. But I kept working with that, and as I got in, it was bleeding some, but it was in and out of the water, so that didn't matter too much. But then I saw a guy that was hung up on the barbed wire under the water. So I went under the water and tried to get him loose from that, and I got to where I could. I was under there so long I had to come up again, and finally went back down, and his life preserver was hung up in the barbed wire, so I was able to loosen the buckle, take that off for him, and get him up. So I pulled him back out, got him. He was not wounded. I got him back, told him to find a rifle, which plenty of them were laying all over the ground, and join his company, which was E Company. And so then it was just a situation where do we save the guys that are drowning or try to get the guys that are dead out? Because the waves were pushing guys in who were dead up on the beach, and it was getting littered there, so much so that it would be very difficult to bring tanks or equipment in. So I was talking to one of my men, Raymond Lepore, and I had been hit again in the left thigh when I went in at another time to bring a guy out. That was bothering me a bit. It was about from my knee up about 14 inches or so in there right to the bone. But I kept going. I put a tourniquet on it, and it didn't make much difference because in and out of the water, even though I released the tourniquet a little bit, you could not treat a wound like that because the sand was wet, everything was wet. Try to put any kind of coagulant on it was impossible. So we had other guys then, infantry guys that were going down. Some were wounded, some had that I remember was able to walk, but not so badly wounded that they couldn't walk. So I was looking for a place to tell my guys that we could get some of the wounded behind, because the machine gunner in front of us was picking the medics off. They had snipers up there that was killing the medics. We also had that in Sicily and Africa. So we had been told if we wanted to take off our Geneva Cross, to take them off, and our helmets also. When I went in, we did not have the Red Cross on our helmet. So after working for, it seemed forever, it was probably an hour or so, I began to get weaker and weaker, and I was looking, said it must be something, someplace that we can get these guys in behind or protect them a little bit from a machine gun. So I saw this big rock, as we thought it was at that time, in the water. It was the only thing in the water that was possible to get anyone behind. And I instructed Myers, Corporal Myers, and some of the other guys that we had there working to try to get the walking wounded headed in that direction, and also they take the guys that could not walk, get them in behind that rock so we could save their lives and get some treatment to them. I went back in the water again, and I continued working as I could to save as many guys from drowning, and trying to at least give them a shot of morphine if they were wounded. All our bandages, of course, had been used up, and they didn't stay on anyway because of the water in and out of the water. But at that time, we began to move. Some of the guys, and it was a godsend that we found that pile of concrete that we call a rock. I think it was there because the Germans had obviously been using a lot of concrete for the pillboxes, as we call them, and other defenses, and probably had too much that day and dumped it there. And I'm so glad that they did that. But then I went back in. Now the fourth wave had been in. We had been promised medical help from a regimental group that was coming in, but we didn't get that help. They landed, but they moved east, down toward the east exit of Omaha Beach, and was able to set up an aid station later on in that area. So I was back again, going under, and the one guy I saw was had his hand up, waving like this. That's all I could see was his hand. So I went back in to get him, and I went down and got him. He was all tangled up also in the barbed wire. And I got him loose, got him in under. My arm was still bleeding and still useful, so I got him under my right arm and turned to go back to get him out on the beach. And a landing craft came in into that area, and dropped his ramp, and when he dropped the ramp, it hit me in the back and broke the lower part of my back. Ooh. And so I hung on to the guy, kept him in my hands, but we were both pushed to the bottom. It was in probably about 4 feet, I'll say 4 feet of water, and pushed it to the bottom. And I was, that was the only time I think that I might say I was scared. We are trained to do jobs, and you don't really get scared. You try to not think of the things that could happen to you. So I was, at that time I was scared, and I could not, it was just pushed down into the sand there with that heavy load, weighing well over 1,000, almost 2,000 pounds, I think it said. And I prayed to God that I asked, excuse me, I asked if I could just give me the strength to save this man. And so for some reason, the ramp went up. And as the ramp went up, they pulled back out of that area, out of that slot, as we call it, and I was able to get up and crawl out. I couldn't walk, and I crawled out and took the guy that I had with me and got him out to where I could talk to Myers again, that was working with me in that area. And I told him that I was not going to be able to go any further, that I was losing so much blood that I was getting weak. And so they took the guy and got him straightened up and out. He wasn't wounded, and sent him back again to his company, G Company. And so after a period of time of continuing trying to work with my back the way it was, and at that time I was bleeding a lot in my thigh here, and that was beginning to give me some problems. I passed out, and but I had accomplished the one thing of getting my guys to get people over behind the rock, and 2 years or 3 years ago, maybe now, time flies, as you know. I got a call from Normandy that the mayor in Colleville-sur-Mer, and that they had gotten permission from the French government to use that rock as a memorial to me and my men.
Wow.
I was asked to come over, and we went over, and they had a great celebration there. I shed many tears that day because my men, finally, I had given the people doing the rock, Chris Kalinda and Kojo Christoph, who lives over in Bayou, names of my men. And so I said, all these men have to be on a plaque on that rock. So that was done. So when I went over to the celebration, I was able to say and look out and say that finally my men had recognition as medics for what they did, and that they had a resting place that I could now name and talk to their families and tell the families what had happened. So that's what happened. Every year now they have a celebration at Ray's Rock, and the thing that is so different in my mind now, when I go back, I can go there and visit my men, which after being with many of them since 1940, we were all just as close as brothers as we all are. But that ended my day there.
Wow. And so you were wounded in the arm, shot in the leg, and your back was broken.
Yeah, this arm went through the elbow, shattered the bone, and went out. Something went through and went out the other side. My thigh was, you can tell sometimes what wounds you, but not bullets so much. But fragmentation flies into pieces, and that can cut out a large hunk of you. Bullets usually go through, and it all is, none of it's good. But the fragmentation, I think, is from pieces of shells that come in, mortar shells or artillery, or it's equipment blown up. The boats, many of the boats were on fire and had blown up, so pieces of that. And on Omaha Beach, if you were there, you see a lot of little stones. They're about this size and about this thick. At that time, they were probably about a foot deep on Omaha Beach, and so much so that you could hardly walk through them. You couldn't dig in, and they had to put down metal sheets or metal to come over with the vehicles when they come in, because they wouldn't drive through that. Every time an artillery shell would hit the beach, or a mortar shell would hit the beach, those pieces of rock would fly into thousands of pieces. I've seen them where they would hit guys' helmets and knock holes in their helmet and kill the guy. I've seen people where they flow into small pieces and just riddle their clothes. So I don't think anyone ever thought of those things being a weapon. Wow. And I'm sure that many people today, even many soldiers, probably didn't think of that. But they caused a lot of death there. It was very difficult to work with. And so after my arm was of course bleeding, and I was getting weaker, as I said before, I finally passed out. Yes, so that
Wow.
happened.
The perseverance is extraordinary. And he was wounded in North Africa, and he was wounded in Italy as well. You would think he would have learned the first time not to avoid it, you know, but he just kept going back.
Not Italy.
Not Italy, sorry, just
Not
North
Italy.
Africa.
Sicily.
Sicily.
Yes. Because we were not in Italy.
Ah,
I
okay.
don't want someone to think that I was in Italy.
Sorry, I was thinking Sicily is a part
But
of Italy.
it's
so-
very much the same. They spoke the same thing.
So as you were there tending to the wounded on Omaha Beach, so was Marcella Ryan LeBeau as well. By the way, belated happy birthday
Thank you.
to you.
Thank you.
She turned 100 on October 12th
Yeah,
of this
but
year. That's extraordinary. Marcella, what was your, as Ray was there doing his duty and pulling people behind Ray's Rock, what were you doing on Omaha Beach that day?
You, honey, they're talking to you.
I'm sorry.
What was your experience like on Omaha Beach that day?
Actually, I was stationed in Leominster, England, preparing for D-Day. And we got our first convoy of patients on 2:30 in the morning on the 7th. And so we were preparing for D-Day in this Leominster, England hospital. While we were there, Glenn Miller came and put on a concert. So we were able to hear his band in the field. And the next day we heard he was missing, and I don't think they found him since then. But when it was safe in August, we crossed the channel and we landed at Utah Beach. We climbed on a rope ladder into a landing barge. We stayed in a cow pasture there at Caratan for several weeks. And they took us on up into Paris, France. We were there temporarily in the hotel, on the hospital Boujan, which the Germans had taken over, and then the Americans took it over. And so we were there briefly, and on into Liège, Belgium. We had a 1,000-bed tent hospital in Liège, Belgium. Mine was the first ward, A number 1. It was a surgical ward, and we're right near surgery. We did a lot of repair work and surgery, and we were busy all the time, night and day. One time, a prisoner of war came through my ward to stay overnight, being evacuated to the United States. And I'll never forget that look, the skin stretched over bone, that vacant stare. They wouldn't talk, but he was on his way home. He was in my ward overnight. And we were busy. It was a fast-moving time. And at one point, we were at the Battle of the Bulge, and they said we were a few miles from the front lines. But we didn't know that at the time. We just did our work, gave many blood transfusions, IVs. Penicillin was new then, and so we gave a lot of penicillin every 4 hours, round the clock. And I want to tell you about one of my corpsmen. We had buzz bombs night and day, and they were frequent. And the patients had the sky divided into 3 areas. The middle was Buzz Bomb Alley. I can't remember what the other 2 were. Every time they hollered Buzz Bomb Alley, you're supposed to take cover from a buzz bomb. Anyway, I had a corpsman who was deathly scared of the buzz bombs. His name was Coffee, and I suspect he was probably 18, 19 years old. I had 2 corpsmen, Sergeant Willie and Coffee. Every time a buzz bomb came, Coffee would be out the door into a foxhole. They had foxholes dug for us. So one night I went to work on night duty, on my tour of night duty on my own ward. I saw Coffee. I knew that he couldn't go on like that without sleep. So I went to my little medicine cabinet, got a sleeping pill, took him down to the mess hall. We had lunch down there, and I told him about the sleeping pill. He was willing to take it. So he took it, and we went back to the ward. And I told Sergeant Willie, take him back to his tent so he can get some sleep. I truly believe that saved him. He couldn't have gone on that way much longer. And then on January 8, 1945, a buzz bomb hit our hospital. It hit the area where the military police were getting ready for bed. 25 men were killed. I didn't know any of them personally, but we would see them standing guard here and there. One guy was a little short guy, always smiley, waving. So they were our military police. I had worked night duty on the shock ward that night. I was going back to my tent. One of the nurses was coming, and she said, "Don't go there." She said, "It's awful. There are limbs all over. They'll need you tonight, so get some sleep." So I'm really glad that I did that. I went back to my tent, got some sleep. Sure enough, in the shock ward that night, we had concussion wounds, some that survived that. And many years later, we went to reunions in Des Moines, Iowa, our 76th General Hospital reunion. And someone had written in a letter. And in this letter, he wrote that he found a hand. This was afterwards. He found a hand, and on that hand was a ring, and he recognized the ring as his friend's ring. So he knew that was his friend's hand. So another time, the administrative officer came, and he made his report. It was his duty to identify all those 25 men. And there was one that they could not identify, so they had to report him missing in action. And they made a plaque to these 25 men in memoriam. So after the war, I had a picture of that plaque. After the war, my daughter Kathy and I went to Liège, Belgium, and I was looking for this plaque. I went to the information counter and explained what I was looking for. And of course, they didn't know anything about it. But there was a man that came up to me on my right. He had been sitting there. He said, "Lady, because of you, we are free. Thank you." And he left. There was another lady sitting there. She got up and she said, "I'll take you any place you want to go." So she got permission from her university to leave her job, and she took us first to her home. She offered us her use of her bathroom, lunch, and took us to the Henry Chapelle Cemetery in Liège, Belgium. There we found this large log. It had all the 25 men listed. Most of them had been repatriated to the next of kin back in the United States. So we were able to find that out. And I met Ferdinand Decenti. He was the superintendent there. He said, "If you will send me pictures when you get home," he said, "I'll try to identify where your hospital had been located and find out what I can." So I did that. And he did massive amounts of work. He sent a picture of every one of the 25 men, their markers, and the area where we had been. And they had built up a transportation company there. And so they reconstructed a little area, a semicircular area, dedicated to these 25 men, and they reconstructed the plaque. So one of the men from our 76th reunion went over there. He came back and reported. He could hardly talk to us because he was so emotional. This dedicated to the 25 men that we lost. While we were there in Liège, Belgium, after the war, we found out that there were 3,000 bombs that landed in the Liège area. And of course, we didn't know that at the time. And one soldier said there were 4 buzz bombs in the air at one time. And we could feel the concussion of the ack-ack on the ground. And my friend, Esther, she lost her balance one day because of the concussion. And she was carrying a little thermometer tray with glass thermometers in there. And she was able to save her thermometers. And she was really proud because she fell from the concussion on the ground. So we were there in the Battle of the Bulge in Liège, Belgium. But we didn't know what was going on as far as the war went. But we learned afterwards that we were 5 and 6 miles from the front lines. There were times when they would light up the sky like night sky like day, and we were told they were looking for troop movements. We could hear the tanks going hour after hour down the streets of Liège. One time we looked, and it looked like the river was on fire. Of course, we didn't know what it was, but that's what it looked like to us. So veterans are my heroes. They're my heroes.
And Marcella, you are a hero to all of us on so many levels. Not only did you save lives and you tended to the wounded, but I want to point out, and I think it's very important, that you are a member of the Two Kettle Band of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, and you are one of the few women out there on the front lines. Please, for the women in this room, your message to them as they serve, get ready to serve, because you went up against a lot, not only the violence and the death, but who you are as a person and what you represented. You have been a role model, not only for women, but for the Native American community, and now young women looking to do and serve like you did. Your message, please, to the women specifically in the room.
Well, I was there for the 60th anniversary of D-Day at Normandy and the 70th anniversary of D-Day. And I wished I had my little prayer that I wrote there, but it's in my purse in the other room. But I was asked to say a prayer at Omaha Beach if I got there when we went to receive the French Legion of Honor Medal in the 60th anniversary. And the one Don who asked me to say this prayer, he said that his father was wounded on D-Day, and that his best friend was wounded on D-Day. So he called for the medic for him, and he never saw him again until after the war, so he never knew what happened. But he asked me to say a prayer there at Omaha Beach, and so I wrote my prayer and I said it. Unfortunately, it's in my purse.
Well, I know you have family in the back, so family, if you are listening, could you go into Marcella's purse or bring out her purse, and let's get the prayer. Okay, they're on it. We're going to get that prayer, okay?
Thank you.
Meantime, why don't we hear from Tom, who on June 5th, the night before the D-Day invasion, with the 101st Airborne, parachuted behind the lines in France, and then to commemorate that jump 75 years later, on June 5th of this past summer, he jumped out of a perfectly good airplane again.
At the age of 97.
At the age of 97.
And when? He's 98. He just corrected me. I'm sorry. He's not 97. He's 98.
As Marcella looks for the prayer, Tom, why don't you recount that day in 1944 when you took off and landed behind the lines in France?
I'm not going to sit here and talk. I'm going to get up.
You want to get up?
Get up.
You get up,
All right,
sir.
you get up.
You get up.
Can I use that?
Yes,
microphone?
you want to use this one? Heck yeah. There you go. How about a round of applause? Yes.
Take us through that night. Take us through that night,
Can't
Tom.
sit. I got to get up and move.
Get up and move.
We don't want you falling asleep.
And I've been moving ever since. I was a high school teacher for 44 years in 2 schools, and Hilltop and Chula Vista High School, East San Diego, and a few years at junior college, numbering about 23. I had 2 years of college when I went into the military. My serial number was 1916-48-59, and the first digit indicates whether you are a volunteer or a draftee. If your first number is a 3, you're a draftee. A lot of bozos around. If your first number was a 1, you were a volunteer. Mine was a 1, and I volunteered for everything except machine gun operation. In the early days, I wasn't going to carry that damn machine gun. It weighed 60 pounds. So they were testing us, for the most part, at Camp Toccoa, Georgia, for 13 weeks. We're not allowed to leave the camp. It was a former CCC camp, and activities were done in semi-secret. There was no jumping allowed. I had 2 best friends later on in activities. Number 1 was my Thompson submachine gun, which I slept with every night, and my trigger off the finger and the safety on. The second one was my parachute. How many of you made parachute jumps? Well, that's a small number, but it's becoming more and more popular. I love my parachute. I don't own one. They cost $10,000, but I still love it. I'm jumping every year, June 6th, in commemoration for those who did not, could not, or would not, were killed and were unable to return to activities. So this last year I jumped twice, once in Normandy and once in Holland, in Drop Zone D. The Holland jump, I ended up in a turnip patch, which was okay. In Normandy, I landed on dry ground. Number 18 man in my plane ended up in the English Channel. He was a strong individual and a pugilist, and he made his way in, took his clothes off, hid in the hedgerows until the fighting started, and got back into activity as quickly as possible. His name was Marvin Van Buskirk, and he was a Canadian and came to the United States and enlisted in the Army. When the Germans came, the activity was pretty much heavy duty. They hit Lidice, Poland, and tore the town up, burned it to cinder, separated muscle from arteries, and several did escape. And if you'll wrap your mind around the activities and the thoughts that he had, and he had one question for the Allies: you came too late. Why did you come so late? We had no answer for that. We had a renaissance and a destiny, but not truly and surely defined. There were more Germans in our case instead of hand grenades, and we were more happy when we had more hand grenades than Germans. Most of the activities that you might be interested in took place just before the war in England, in Camp Marbury. There were 11 small camps there, and the 101st Airborne Division was sent to several of them, and they practiced activities that, for the most part, were kept quite secret. We went to dioramas and saw the activities that were developed in clay at about 3,000 feet altitude. So we learned what was going on and what we should do. Our objective, and from Drop Zone D, for the 501 Parachute Infantry Company C, was to move to the beachhead, Utah, and control it as best we could, and take San Marie de Monte and stop all the tanks from coming in as quickly as we possibly could. We completed those things, but taking off from memory at 8:21 English double summertime, it was chaos from start to beginning. Everything seemed to go wrong, but we corrected it as we moved about. We had 6 parapack bundles slung underneath the C-47 aircraft, one in the door. I jumped number 1 every jump I've made except the practice jumps of the first 5. And the men that, for the most part, were going to do all the jumping were 18 in number. fully loaded, everything we carried, except communication such as pens and pencils and other electronic devices. We were not allowed to have any of those in our possession, because if you were ever captured, you were in deep trouble in a hurry. We were the point of the sword for the most part in our activities in Normandy and practice. We practiced even in combat. I had 195 days of combat, 4 wounds, and 3 campaigns. The division had 4 campaigns for the most part. On the last campaign in Bastogne, they really got me and put me out for the rest of the war, which was about 2 months left. At the airport, a regimental colonel stood on a jeep covered with a camouflage parachute and gave us a knife speech. Knife, K-N-I-F-E, knife speech. This is a night jump. It is the only night jump that will take place from here on to the end of the war. As he stood on the hood of the Jeep, he reached down into his left leg, and tried to pull out his Bowie knife. He was in the habit of throwing a Bowie knife at a 4 by 8 foot piece of plywood, 3/4 of an inch thick, with tojo on one side and Hitler on the other side. The last time he threw it without success, it bounced back and hit him and cut him. But when we found that out, it was kind of a joke. But in the last case, as we faced him in Normandy, the 1st Regiment of the 501 Parachute Infantry in the 1st Battalion, his failure to pull out the Bowie knife became a laughing stock and a laughing joke for the last 75 years. He could not pull it out, so he reached for his trench knife on his belt and took that and threw it, and it stuck right where he wanted it. And then he told us that he wanted to shake hands with every one of us, and we marched on to our dinner, had steak and ice cream and peas. From there, we moved on to the airport landing area where the aircraft would be taking off. And General Eisenhower came up with some of his entourage. He came to 502 Parachute Infantry, and Lieutenant Strobel was standing in front of him with the big number 23 on his chest. That was the number of the plane he was going to go in. So the conversation came about there. And he was asking him about fishing and hunting and et cetera, et cetera. They stood with historical accuracy in front of each other for the most part. And after he excused us, we, for the most part, went to our aircraft. Marvin Van Buskirk, number 18 man in my plane, took a shower just after dinner, and he left his dog tags in the shower. And on the way to marching to the aircraft, we could hear the clinking and clanking of dog tags in our mess kit. And that was the giveaway, but he didn't have any. He had left them in the shower room and told me about it. So we took his equipment and told him to go back to the shower and try to find it. He went back, couldn't find it, so we penned 2 pieces of canvas for him. He had the best dog tags that were ever issued by the non-government. We took off at 8:41 English double summertime from the small airport, 18 men per the aircraft, a pilot, co-pilot, and a crew chief. There's a steel cable that runs from the pilot's cabin to the aft of the ship, and we're jumping static line. We hook up to that, so we'll fall from the aircraft probably about 15 or 20 feet, and then the parachute opens, and for the most part, it's uncontrollable. We had to climb the risers if we possibly could, but it didn't do too much good. The jump altitude was 750. I jumped at about 500 because of the incidents that did take place. So taking off from the airport, Section 16 of 45 planes assembled at 5,000 feet, flew toward Portsmouth, England, codenamed Portsmouth Bill, dropped down to 1,500 feet under the German radar, and in the middle of the channel, a submarine gave us a signal. We headed toward Jersey and Guernsey Islands, flew over those for the most part, which were occupied by the Germans, but had been bombed before, and generally quiet and nothing really going on there. A second submarine in Biscay Bay between Cotton Peninsula and the Brittany Peninsula gave us another signal. We turned left and headed toward Barnesville on the east coast of the Cotton Peninsula. I stood in the door number 1, and the 3 lights above the door are green, white, and a red one. As long as you're in flight, the white light is on. When you have 8 minutes to go before jump time, the white light goes out, the red light goes on, and the countdown starts. The jumping altitude again was 750. The landform flows all the water from the west to the east. The Douve River, the Jordan, the Mediterranean was behind us, and the several rivers, for the most part, were at flood stage. On the coast of 7,000 yards of beaches, the area was marked by poles called Rommel's asparagus, for the most part on wire strung from the tops of each one to the other, and then some mines placed on some of the poles. Anti-glider and anti-parachute deterrents. We were told for the most part to keep our legs crossed when we come down, otherwise you might strike some of these wires and you get cut up pretty bad. I landed in a interesting place. For the most part, it was quiet with no noise whatsoever, so that made it a little bit more of a concern. But back in the plane, as we made the turn, I saw the small village of Barnesville at a low tide. I didn't know where we were really, but it was okay with me. I was looking out the door, and evidently the pilots were aware that the Germans were sending up anti-aircraft fire and bursting at about 1,000 feet. So that's about the middle of in the upper portion of our jump altitude. Section 16 immediately broke up, turned to the right, and planes were going in all directions. This gigantic armada was 200 miles long, 982 C-47s, and 10 miles wide. Wow. And it took 2 hours to get all the paratroopers in. The gliders came in the next morning at about 6 o'clock, and by that time we had had a few short battles, and we captured 400 Germans from the 6th German Parachute Infantry Regiment. What are we going to do with captured Germans? We're 6 to 8, 10 miles inside of the beaches. We turned them over to the glider pilots, and after 37 days of fighting in Normandy, several of us were walking down a decomposed granite road, and one of the German prisoners was smiling and mumbling something to me. I went over what he said, and he told me in broken English, "Yesterday we kill, today we laugh." I put my finger on his nose, flipped off his helmet, and threw it across the road. I said to him, "Today we kill, tomorrow we laugh." That shut him up. In the aircraft, as we approached and it turned to the right, we were supposed to jump on drop zone B, but it was underwater. Evidently, the pilots knew a little bit about it, but not for sure how much. We crossed over to drop zone D, and I jumped out at that point. We were traveling 276 miles an hour. We can't jump at that speed. We had no self-sealing gas tanks. I weighed 267 pounds. My normal weight was 137. The rest of it was all sorts of bric-a-brac of kind of warfare activities that we would need to be using on the ground. My left foot was out. My left toe was out. The commands were stand up by Lieutenant Jansen with visual signals. You couldn't hear anything in the aircraft anyway, there was so much noise. So we stood up, we hooked up, and we closed up, and Lieutenant Jansen went to the number 18 man, checked him, see that his hookup was correct. Otherwise, he went out the door, he'd have his arm torn off for sure. Stand in the door, and so I crouched low, both hands on either side of the door. Number 2 and 3 men, for the most part, had automatic releases to drop the bundles. Each weighed 300 pounds, so there's 1,800 pounds of equipment going away. When they did that prematurely, the plane went up about 50 feet. That settled me down with bent knees to the floor, and when I stepped out, the prop blast hit me. My left arm got caught in the lower left-hand corner of the door, squeezing down real tight. I swung out, came in, hit the side of the aircraft, swung out, came in, and turned just a little bit and got my arm free, and I lost my brand new Hamilton wristwatch, for which I paid $284, and I hope some good Frenchman got it. I think I jumped between 450 and 500 feet. I can't prove that, but we were low and going in fast.
Wow.
I made about 3 oscillations and hit the ground. My musette bag came up in front of my face. My reserve parachute was in the way, and I made a parachute landing fall over my right arm, not being injured at all. You know about the crickets? Evidently no one knows about those things.
Is that the clickers?
Boston Shoe Company made a crick. Everyone had one of those, and that was our signal to and show us how to assemble. Now we were spread over 50 to 60 square miles. I didn't see my company commander for 2 weeks while they gathered together as best they could and picked up one another. They did all kinds of activities to destroy many enemy communications as best they could, and which they did without any difficulties. In so doing, the safety mechanism on my chest, for the most part, was a punch and release a safety mechanism. I couldn't even get at that because of the musette bag was in the way. So I took out my switchblade knife under my double chin, zippered compact. My cricket fell out, and I never found it from that point on. I opened the switchblade knife and started cutting the risers, and by the time I got halfway through, both the second, third men were on top of me, and they had the mortar. We crossed a small canal, and for the most part there, we met with a Frenchman who gave us some blasé activities and told us where Carenton was. From that point on, we moved about as best we could for the next week and a half, and then met our company commander, and they asked me about the gentleman who escaped the crimes at Lidesay. Listen to his voice as he had one question to ask. Why did you come so late? Will you come again? We will plant our boots in the soil of France as quickly as we can. We are too old to concern ourselves with the exigencies of war, so we bring with us a fresh young group of individuals who are adept, for the most part, in the use of civil criminal activities. End of paragraph.
Wow.
Woo! Did you catch all that?
I did. I mean, such
Everybody
amazing
take copious
stories. You know.
notes.
We should have this forum be all day long, because I mean we're just barely scratching the surface here. But time, we're told, is beginning to grow short. So Lewis, why don't you tell us what your experience was?
Well, as we came up the English Channel to the Omaha beach. We had to just wait around till it was time for the third wave to go in. And when we went in with the third wave, I drove a gasoline truck off of the LST onto the beach. And when I got on the beach with the truck, I jumped out of it quick and got my rifles and flamethrower and flare, and I had to lay down the beach with the dead soldiers. There was all dead soldiers around there. And then had to crawl our way up under the cliff. And once I got under the cliff, the machine up on top there, they had a machine gun. The Germans were shooting down at us. I got my flamethrower out and shot the flame underneath the cliff up there and put that all on fire underneath that machine gun and got that machine gun out of the way. And then I shot a flare up in the sky, and I knew the Navy would know what I wanted. And they got the signal and shot and knocked off the other machine guns up there. Then we had to lay under the cliff until the Rangers were the first ones to go up the cliff. And it was 170 feet high. And they went up and knocked off a lot of machine guns on the way up and down. And the Germans were cutting the ropes. The ladder was a rope ladder. You went up. So after they got up there and got some of those guns out of the way, I had 35 men. And two of them, I lost two of them as we made the landing. And I told them, let's go up the cliff now. And the ones that didn't have no guns, because they lost them in the water as they was trying to get onto the beach. They had so much equipment and all on them, they had to drop them in the water. So I told them to go down there and get you a gun off of the dead soldiers and follow me up the cliff. So we got up, we had to fight our way up there too. And once we got up there, then we had to fight our way to St. Lo. And it took 43 days of securing St. Lo's. And after we got through that, we fought our way all the way to Reims, France. And when we got to Reims, the General Thrasher come up to me and he says, I want you to go to the supply houses around and find the material we need for the soldiers, for our headquarters. So he gave me a book which was German, French, and English to go get the equipment. So I took one man with me. We went to a lumber yard where they had the stuff we needed, and I pointed to everything that I wanted, and he had everything I wanted, but he wouldn't sell it to me. I said, we're here to free your country, and you don't want to sell it to us? I'm going to sell it to you. So I left, went back to camp. I got me 4 men in a big truck. I says, follow me. And we went back over there, and I told him I wanted that stuff. He said, no, can't. So I got my pistol out and pointed it at him. I says, okay, man, load it all up. So they got everything loaded up on the truck, and then I gave him a paper to take to the Army to get his money for the stuff that we took. Now I went back and told the general what I'd done. He said, oh, me, we're going to get in trouble. I said, no, we're not. He's afraid I'm going to come back and get him. And we didn't have no trouble.
We should also point out that May 7th, 1945, you were in Reims and you were at the Little Red Schoolhouse where the surrender was signed. Tell us about that day.
All right. Well, I was going to get to that now. Then I was put in charge. Well, before I got to that, I got to give you another story.
Okay.
Working with the major, which was an engineer, and he And the general come up to him and told him he wanted to get some mess hall. They wanted to build a big mess hall from the prefab buildings, put it together. And he monkeyed about 3 weeks trying to get together. And we was out there with him, and the general come up again. He says, it's been 3 weeks, you hadn't done nothing. And he says, well, I'm trying. General looked at me, he says, can you do it? I said, yes, sir. I said, can you and I step aside and talk? He said, okay, Major, you stay there. I said, what I want from you, General, is let me use the German prisoners and 2 guards that can speak German and English. He says, you got it. So the general left. The major, he's an engineer. He says, how you think you're going to do it? I says, I'm going to do it, but I wouldn't tell him how I was going to do it. And so in about 3 weeks, I had it all put together. And right after that, the general transferred the major out, which he was in charge of the whole city of Reims, France, and the Little Red Schoolhouse. And he put me in charge of the city of Reims, France, and schoolhouse.
And the schoolhouse.
So that's how I got to the schoolhouse. So in charge of that, which was the war room and all. And so we had the surrender there, the German surrender, and I was in the room with them.
Wow.
When the surrender took place.
What was that like?
Well, it was terrible there because Germans come in with a straight face. They just good standing around, didn't say hello, nothing, until then they read off who was placed where everybody was going to sit, and there was the French and the British, the Russians. All of them had to be there do the signing with them. So they finally sat down and did the signing. And then after that, the German one that did the signing, he stood up and just nodded his head, and he wouldn't say nothing else. So then I said, well, we got to go up to see Eisenhower. He was 2 doors up there in temporary office. He wanted to see them after the signing. So we took him up there, and he asked them, were they satisfied the way the thing went? They told him yes. That was it. They dismissed him.
So I have now been told that we have to surrender as moderators because we have moved in to the second session, and folks need a break. But wouldn't it be fabulous, Marcella,
If she would finish with
if
the
you
prayer.
would finish us up here and read your prayer? Louis, thank you.
This came about by my daughter. My daughter Jerry was working out at Fort Meade, and a friend of hers, Don, wanted for me to say a prayer at Omaha Beach if I could get there. I was going for the 60th anniversary of D-Day, where 100 veterans were being awarded the French Legion of Honor Medal. So he wanted me to say a prayer for his father and his best friend who was wounded at D-Day. He said he called for the medic for his best friend, and he never saw him again till after the war. And he found out that he had a severe head injury but recovered. So he wanted me to say a prayer at Omaha Beach. So this is my prayer. June 6th, 04. Great Spirit, guide my steps on this path to Omaha Beach. Guide my hands as I collect sand from this hallowed ground. Great Spirit, accept my prayer for the brave and courageous soldiers who saw the horrors of war here this day, 60 years ago, June 6, 1944. Great Spirit, keep us ever mindful of the great sacrifices made to liberate France and bring peace to our world by these valiant men. O Great Spirit, now hold my hand and walk with me up the cliff of Omaha Beach, filled with emotion no words can ever express.
Wow.
Thank you.
A final round of applause, please.
And if I could, there is a reason why this is known as the greatest generation. So as you embark upon your military careers, imagine the sacrifice and the hardship, the terror, the bravery, the courage that all of these folks went through and demonstrated as they carried out the jobs that they had been given. A nation, a world is grateful to all of you and to all of your comrades. And we thank you for being here today. And an hour and 15 minutes is nowhere near long enough to go through everything that you went through that day, the days and months ensuing, and the years that have passed since then, because we do know that George, his golf game started to fail him in his 80s, and so he took up documentary filmmaking and has told so many wonderful stories as well. So again, we are indebted to all of you. You are the greatest generation. You are heroes all.
And the
Thank
great
you for being
spirits.
with us. And the great spirits.
Well, with the poem, you are all great spirits, Marcella. Thank you.
Don't leave me. Don't leave me. Don't leave me. But I'll take a few more minutes of your time. But let's ask our panelists to go on back. We've got to switch some electronics, but I've got some things for you all. We are, as you heard, truly in the presence of not just heroes, but the role models. You heard General Spencer talk about be careful who you choose as role models and mentors. The American Veterans Center is truly honored to also have some mentors and role models and folks that have meant a great deal to us. So before we take a break, which we're going to have to speed up anyway, I'm still going to ask John Roberts and Kira Phillips to come out.
Sure.
Please.
We were helping our heroes back.
Exactly right.
Lewis didn't want to let go. He said, "Hold on, this is the best part of the whole day." Sorry, Lewis. I'll be right back.
I'm sure we all agree that we could listen to these folks, actually not just for an hour and a half, but probably for a day and a half or a week and a half. But I encourage you, as this weekend goes on, when you see these folks in the hotel lobby or tomorrow night at the banquet, take the time to go up and introduce yourselves, listen to their stories, shake the hand of people that laid it all on the line. So before we go to a break, Kira, I am very pleased to present to you on behalf of the American Veterans Center not only our deepest thanks and respect, but a small token of our appreciation, not just for what you and John have done today, but also, John, are you coming back out? Hey, John.
I think Lewis's wife might have grabbed him.
Kira was kind enough to be an announcer for our annual Memorial Day parade. So come back in May for that.
Thank you.
But truly, we are indebted to you to share your talents and your time and your dedication for these men and women that will be our future leaders.
Well,
so on behalf of the American Veterans Center,
thank you
thank
so
you
much.
very,
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you. Thank you. That means so much to me. Thank you. And I will find my husband. somewhere.
Well, I'm going to ask you if you would deliver this
I
to
will
John, or
deliver
if he's going to step out. I keep calling
He might
him.
be helping
I know he's-
some of the here he comes.
All right.
John? That's all right.
Hello, John.
It's
I had a nature call.
Well, I don't know how to shake your hand then, but never mind.
It was a long hour and 15 minutes.
John, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I couldn't help that.
Lord have mercy.
Probably should know better. But, an old GI, we have no clue.
And you know what? When you're in country, you go to the bathroom
Yeah,
anywhere.
yeah,
Trust
exactly
me. Yes,
right.
I've been there.
John, on behalf of the American Veterans Center, on behalf of the folks assembled here and all of us, we greatly appreciate your sharing your
thank
time
you
and
so much.
talents.
We love our military.
We do.
love our
We love our
military. Thank you all so
Thank
much.
you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you.